excellent keep. Eli had a really rough 7, mulligan to 6. This is not the type of 6 that you want. You have 2 cards here that are not at all enabled. You have no mill for your Drown in the Loch, and your Of One Mind has no creatures to reduce the cost. At least you have a negate, but this hand is very much running into some of the normal problems that you would expect from the Rogues Mirror, which is you don't have any removal. If they play some creatures, you're just going to get run over.
All right. Matt Sperling, meanwhile, has a copy of Ruin Crab, has in fact one of each of all 3 of the 1-drops. Ruin Crab, Merfolk Windrobber, and Thieves Guild Enforcer at the ready, as well as a Heartless Act to deal with the first threat coming over from Eli, although we know, of course, that there is not one ready just yet.
Yeah, this is about the dream for Matt Sperling. Not turn 1 just because he didn't have the perfect mana base, as we've talked about a lot. Rogues can sometimes struggle to cobble together its early turns, but turn 2 Ruin Crab, Land, Thieves Guild Enforcer means by the time you're getting an attack in with that Enforcer on turn 3, it's already going to be pumped up and a 3/2 attacker.
Eli's hand looking a lot slower. Drown in the Loch, not doing anything just yet, as you say. Wow, just going to spend this turn putting lures in the hand.
Yeah, I think when Matt sees that the best thing Eli can do is put Lurrus in the hand on turn 3, and he's got a Heartless Act in case that Lurrus actually tries to get played in the next 2 turns, because there would be no counter backup to follow it, Matt has to be feeling really good about it. Obviously, the lands he's playing, the rogues he's playing, they are providing more fodder for the opponent's Lurrus. So Eli, out of desperation, may be forced to play Lurrus and play a 1-drop from his graveyard next turn. But at the moment, this is something Matt's okay with. And, normally I would be kind of against the early BM, but Matt Sperling lost to Eli Kassis twice yesterday. He had some terrible luck in these mirror matches, and when he finds himself in a position of renewed power here in day 2, he's gonna take it.
I mean, nobody could blame him for celebrating the fact that he's gotten off to a good start here, but I'm somebody that just has arena emotes turned off completely. I'm like the opposite of Canister. So I can never really fully get behind the arena BMs, but completely understandable, as you say. Here is that Lurrus of the Dream Den hitting the battlefield. And it looks like Eli has found a copy of Ruin Crab from the graveyard. So going to be able to start getting this mill on, turning on that Drown in the Loch eventually. But is Matt Sperling too far ahead at this point?
Pretty close to it. Those Merfolk Windrobbers are already online, so the Drown in the Loch, the Heartless Act in Eli's hand will have to go after these Thieves Guild Enforcers, but unfortunately what he's facing down is a full board, a few creatures that replace themselves, and there's more gas to come. Eli has already used his Lurrus. Yes, there's copies of Agadim's Awakening to get it back, but he doesn't have any yet, and he also doesn't have the mana for that yet. So that's something that he'll be looking for as one just gets milled, and there's more to come here for Matt.
Bit of pincer on pincer action here as one Ruin Crab jumps in front of another. Eli's down to 12 from that last attack, and Matt Sperling is feeling extremely comfortable now in this game number 1.
Yeah, Matt just milled 2 copies of Into the Story from Eli. One of the things that I was mentioning is that is a big card, and trying to win the card advantage battle at least. Eli not even maybe getting to that point in the game, considering he's being run over by the board currently, but should he get there, the tools available to him are not quite there.
He may have milled 2 copies, but Eli has found the 3rd copy, although, of course, it is still at full price right now, given that Matt only has 4 cards in the graveyard at this very moment in time. I'm going to lead off with just the divination mode of One Mind, desperately digging for something to get him out of this hole.
Yeah, the messaging from Eli this game has been fairly clear about what type of hand he's dealing with. He has made it abundantly clear to Matt Sperling that his hand is awkward. When you're putting Lurrus into your hand on turn 3, when you're casting a full cost of 1 mind on turn 5, those are not power plays. That is not telling Matt Sperling the story of a man who's in a good position. These are desperation, just trying to stay alive and grasp at straws in this game. And one of the big things that Eli will be extremely disappointed in is Cling to Dust is already in Matt Sperling's graveyard. This was perhaps one of the most important cards in this mirror match game 1, and Matt Sperling has found his copy. He can immediately use it now while Eli is tapped out, and just one, exile that Lurrus from Eli's graveyard in case we were worried about an Aghanim's Awakening, and two, reduce his graveyard size to make sure those Adrenaline Locks just do nothing.
Yeah, managing your own graveyard, of course, paramount in for any deck that's playing against rogues, and especially, of course, in the mirror match. These players intimately familiar.
Matt just got Eli's Cling to Dust.
Ouch.
We'll see if he chooses it.
We do see it come up there, just slightly delayed on the hand cam for Eli. But as you say, Eli's Cling to Dust is milled. But Matt decides to actually just prioritize putting Lurrus in hand for now.
Does still have his copy of Adrenaline Lock. That's a very, very hard counter at this point. Eli still doesn't have Into the Story reduced, and his only land drop available to him here is an Aghanim's Awakening. He could potentially force through an Into the Story by paying 3 life for that Awakening, but I don't think that's 3 life he has available to him at the moment.
I don't think he also could do that.
Well, the land drop from the Aghanim's Awakening will mill 3 more cards for Matt and reduce the cost of the Into the Story. But again, these are plays that someone with more life would have the luxury to make. And that is not the position Eli finds himself in after this just extremely good curve from Matt.
All right, so 3 more cards are going into the graveyard. There is going to be a Merfolk Windrobber that is on blocking duty, we assume. Maybe chump blocking duty at this point of the matchup.
And at this point, I think Matt is very much looking forward to forcing Eli in a position where perhaps he's going to go for Adrenaline Lock defensively, and Matt will get to use this Cling to Dust in response, reduce his graveyard size, maybe counter the Adrenaline Lock. So there's a lot still to be played for here.
All right, so it looks like the Merfolk Windrobber is just going to offer up the trade. Wow, and Eli is in fact going to go for that defensive Drown in the Lock. We'll see how Matt Sperling decides to manage the graveyard, but I believe there are enough cards in the graveyard now that even a Cling to Dust escaping away several cards would not actually negate the effects of this Drown in the Lock on a 1-drop.
Yeah, at this point, I believe with 7 cards in the graveyard, even if Matt Sperling got rid of 6 of them, he would still be left with 1, and that would be enough for Adrenaline Lock to destroy this Thief's Guild Enforcer.
So we're going to see the Soaring Thought Thief come down in response. That is going to draw out Eli's second Drown in the Lock, which now leaves Matt the ability to use the copy of Drown in the Lock in hand to potentially protect this Thieves Guild Enforcer if he so chooses.
It's going to be really scary, actually, as if he does that, his defenses will be down. We know Eli has a copy of Into the Story in his hand. Matt obviously milled 2 copies earlier, so he may not be putting him on that, but at least has to be thinking about one of the only ways he loses this game is if Eli is able to resolve Into the Story, and right now Matt doesn't have that much pressure left on his board.
Yeah, all of a sudden things have turned around a little bit for Eli. You know, we had him down a lot in the first few turns of this game, but now he's about to untap with 6 mana Into the Story with negate backup. Matt Sperling has 2 cards in hand, one of which is Lurrus that is face up. So Eli Kassis knows that the most that Matt Sperling can have is one answer to this Into the Story.
Yeah, and I think he's just going to go for the Into the Story here. It looks like at least that's what he's considering, and this is the window to do it. He knows one of the cards in Matt's hand is Luris. So the worst case scenario, if he goes for Into the Story, is it gets countered. The second worst case, and by doing it on the upkeep, he's not even worried about an end step creature to put on more pressure. This is really, really great timing from Eli, and perhaps the beginning of his comeback here.
What happened in this game, Manny? Well, in 1 second, Matt had, Thieves Golden Forces on board, an Air Force going on, Soaring Thought Thief about to resolve.
Oh,
Oh my goodness. Sacrificing the Murphy Wind Robber to find the second counter. Matt Sperling is really on a roll this morning.
so far so good. Still need to close out this game, but there's very few copies of Into the Story left for Eli. I believe there's only one more and a Fabled Passage follow-up. So Matt that was Eli's final push, and I think Matt has managed to move past it.
But now, Marnie, now we have to think about that Cling to Dust again, because Eli is going to be untapping with the ability to cast his Cling to Dust on Matt's Cling to Dust.
Eli does have that available to him. The big problem at this point is Eli's library is very quickly dwindling. This isn't something that the game is not going to go an indefinite length from this point forward. This is something that is a clock for Eli, and he needed a big boost of cards, even though that does lower his deck size, in order to manage to make that aggressive push. With that Into the Story not resolving, he may not be able to cobble together enough pressure to close out this game before his library is gone.
And we don't know if the fourth copy of Into the Story has been milled or if it is still potentially hiding out in the library for Eli. Going to do a little bit of milling of his own first with that Ruin Crab. He does have a Heartless Act to, maybe stem the bleeding of his library by getting rid of Matt's Ruin Crab, but we know, and Eli knows, that Luris is on the horizon.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Matt is at least planning for with this Fabled Passage. Potentially keep it on the battlefield, play Luris next turn, maybe return another Ruin Crab from his graveyard if he has one available to him, and then try to get two triggers that way.
Matt's library had a healthy, I believe that it was 29 cards remaining.
Yeah, we don't have a count on Eli's quite yet.
It's always fun when you're covering these Rogues matches because there's a point at which you start. Oh, I believe it's 40 cards in the graveyard, so it's got to be under 20, maybe in the 15 range.
Hey,
or the 10
it
range.
looks like under 10 at this point, and
yeah.
Luris coming back, Luris bringing back a Ruin Crab. Matt drew a Fabled Passage for his turn, perhaps the best card in this exact situation. As there,
and that is going to do it. Eli knows that Fabled Passage means that he will not have the time available. So despite a great comeback and some epic counter wars, we do see Matt Sperling take down the first game of this 75 card mirror. Now, Marnie, when you're approaching sideboarding, and I think Corey and Riley discussed this a little bit yesterday actually on the broadcast, is there a little bit of, okay, we discussed this sideboard strategy as a team, but I'm going to slip in something different, or I'm going to mix it up a bit just to try and wrong foot the other one?
There can be. There's certainly different positions that justify maybe juking, and if one person goes for this plan, for example, if one person is cutting their Ruin Crabs, if I keep my Ruin Crabs, it'll work out well for me. There are aspects of that to some matchups, but typically we're not going to see that. I would guess that the one deviation here with Eli boarding out Negate and Matt boarding out a single copy of One Mind, it comes down to being on the play versus the draw, and if the positions were reversed, we would see the exact same sideboarding from the other player. So I would guess that at least in this specific matchup, the standard sideboard plan that they have laid out is too valuable, and there isn't a deviation that will give them enough advantage for them to consider it.
All right, well, let's have a look at that sideboard plan. The thing that excites me the most, man, is 3 copies of Skyclave Shade coming in from the side. This card doesn't look like that much on the front half, just the 2 mana 3/1, but the fact that you can just keep replaying out of your graveyard when your opponent is milling your cards for you, this threat is so sticky and so difficult to get rid of.
Yeah, Skyclave Shade is going to be one of the most important cards to keep an eye on, and the other sideboard cards we see coming in are essentially answers, not just the Skyclave Shade, but answers to the question of what do you do with your own graveyard, what do you do with your opponents. We see a Soul Guide Lantern, 2 more Cling to Dust, up to a full 3 copies, as well as a Timuret Chosen from Death, perhaps one of Timuret's most prominent outings in the standard format. But, having a creature that can attack graveyards indefinitely, that's not a bad tool to have in this mirror.
All right, well, let's go down to game number 2. Eli Kassis is on the play this time. Has, however, kept a hand that is reactive, shall we say, again. It's Drown in the Lock, Double Mystical Dispute, and Eliminate. Matt Sperling, on the other hand, Thieves Guild Enforcer, Timuret Chosen from Death, Double Negate, Drown in the Lock, and Into the Story. All he's missing is a couple more lands.
Yeah, Matt looking for lands, Eli looking for any creature, as his hand is just full of answers at this point. And what you really want in your rogue strategy is have a turn 1 or turn 2 creature like that Thieves Guild Enforcer, like that Soaring Thought Thief, and then sit behind your counter spells and your removal spells while you're getting some chip damage in. That is not something Eli has available to him at the moment, so he's just going to be playing a draw go game for the time being, and as long as Matt Sperling doesn't stumble too hard on mana, that's going to work out in his favor.
That's a very big if, though, Manny. And one of the sort of sub-narratives of this weekend has been players' mana bases. We've said it a lot about this Rogues deck, we've said it about Temur, but these mana bases are pretty delicate, fragile creatures. And look at this. Matt Sperling sliding in the copy of Timuret Chosen from Death. It's a 2-drop, but he is unable to play that because that requires double black. Soaring Thought Thief, that can come down, but it's going to be a turn late because his opening hand was double Fabled Passage. So, these decks, they can stumble a little bit if the mana doesn't work out.
And stumble they have for Matt Sperling here, which means Eli on his end step is going to have a window to Mystical Dispute the Soaring Thought Thief, remove this Thieves Guild Enforcer while Matt is tapped out, and essentially tell Matt, okay, your mana screwed. I've removed all the pressure you have. What are you going to do about it now?
And another Drown in the Lock is not going to help Matt Sperling one bit here, and he can only pass the turnover. Eli still hasn't found another creature as a threat, but does have a Lurrus available. Happy to continue playing Draw Go for now, though.
Yeah, this is a game that Eli is happy to play, at least for the time being. Matt is still not hitting his land drops, so really struggling to cobble together a game plan here. But Matt has the tools to get back into this game. We saw the same from Eli last game, which was Rogues is not a deck that can just fold over to what your opponent is presenting. So given enough time, Matt can certainly still try to cobble together a game plan. I think one of the worst things here for Matt is the fact that he's already milled 1 copy of Cling to Dust for Eli. So these Drowned in the Locks that would perhaps help him stay in this game, they're essentially textless at the moment.
Eli is doing all of this with the Soaring Thought Thief on the stack, clearing out the graveyard and now thinking about whether to Mystical Dispute, but has plenty of answers to this 1/3 flyer out. Oh, and there it is. Skyclave Shade found for Eli Kassis. That's going to be a pretty big threat.
Yeah, Skyclave Shade was exactly the type of card that Eli was looking for there. Plays the Lurrus actually as a creature, even though there's nothing in the graveyard. And Eli just very much in a power position here in this game.
Just that 1 card in the graveyard for Eli, the Cling to Dust, even though it looks like it's not because of the way that Arena displays it. We know, of course, that the fact that it's there in that purple hovering zone means that it is available in the graveyard. Soaring Thought Thief is going to come in, fuel for another couple of cards. But Matt Sperling having to discard a hand size, really not the position that he wants to find himself in.
Not at all. I think we'll likely see one of the more expensive cards go here. It's actually going to be Into the Story, and this is brutal for Matt. He knows that Into the Story will essentially never be online as long as that Cling to Dust is in the graveyard, and he's not playing a tempo game enough to force Eli to not play around it.
So in Eli's upkeep, we're going to see Matt attempt to take out this Lurrus. But he only has 2 mana to work with, and Eli knows that any number of these cards, Mystical Dispute, Negate, or maybe even his own copy of Drown in the Lock, will be able to ensure that Lurrus survives another turn cycle at least.
Yeah, we saw Eli opt to not use that Mystical Dispute a couple of turns ago when Matt played that Soaring Thought Thief, perhaps recognizing its value in these types of scenarios where as a 1-mana counter and Matt falling behind on lands, he can use it to essentially gain more advantage. But here was a good spot for it as now he's able to leave up double counter spell or double removal spell potentially while still playing the Skyclave Shade and compounding the pressure on the board.
Soaring Thought Thief not looking so great when it's all by its lonesome. And Matt Sperling can't even attack, or at least decides to leave this one back on blocks for now.
Part of the decision making for that is there's currently nothing for Lurrus to bring back in Eli Kassis' graveyard. This is one of the reasons that Eli played that Lurrus out there, was because he's essentially telling Matt, I've put this in play. I've got counter spells to back it up and protection. If you attack me, you're only giving me more card advantage by putting things in my graveyard. So Matt actually opting not to attack with that Soaring Thought Thief purely to avoid the possibility of putting a target for Lurrus to bring back in the graveyard.
All right. Eli gets in for 6. And finally, on turn 8, 9, Matt Sperling has found the 3rd land drop. It is Clearwater Pathway, and that is going to be able to unlock some more of these plays that he's been holding since the beginning of the game.
Yeah, Matt, it's so ugly for him as it doesn't feel like there's any good options. He wants double black for Timoret, but he may need double blue for something like Drown Lock with counter backup, and on every front, it's just so bad for Matt Sperling at the moment.
Yeah, that Fabled Passage is sat on the battlefield for Eli Kassis as well, in case the Skyclave Shade gets killed. It can just be replayed immediately. And at this point in the matchup, when Eli has so many lands, that Skyclave Shade can be coming back as a 5/3 as well, potentially putting even more pressure on. So we'll see how Matt Sperling decides to navigate this. It's going to repeat that play of the previous turn, Drown in the Lock, attempting to get rid of Lurrus in the upkeep.
Unfortunately, Eli has now put...
I believe we were just about to see Eli put Cling into Dust on the stack, which is going to exile enough things from his graveyard that this Drown in the Lock, we assume is not going to be able to be big enough to take out that Lurrus, and indeed, that is the case. You see the oops coming out. You know, Matt Sperling did a little bit of the arena BMs earlier, but is the one to hold up his hand and say, oops, I missed that one.
It's nice to see that he can take it as well as deal it here in this match. And I think the oops there is in regards to Matt missed that Eli had a Fabled Passage in play. So in response to the removal spell that Matt tried to cast during the upkeep, Eli had the mana to crack the Fabled Passage, putting another card in the graveyard and being able to escape Cling to Dust, reduce his graveyard size to the point where Matt's Drown in the Loch was just countered naturally. Matt could have played around that by casting the removal spell on his turn. We know that Eli had a counterspell anyway, so it wouldn't have worked, but it was the type of position where Matt really just did not have good options available to him because of all the information that we have.
All right, and here it is. Matt Sperling at 5 life. Eli trying to make the final push to get lethal through now. This turn, Heartless Act targeting Soaring Thought Thief. Matt's going to respond with a negate, and for Eli, he just has the one copy of Drown in the Lock available. So gonna let that one go for now and just draw 4, see what he finds.
Yeah, I don't think Eli is too much of a rush to try to close out this game. He knows that from this position with Matt Sperling on 3 lands, he's never going to lose this game. It's just a matter of making sure that he doesn't walk into something that can potentially buy Matt more turns than he otherwise would get.
So Heartless Act takes out the Soaring Thought Thief. The team comes in, but with that 1 black mana remaining, Thieves Guild Enforcer is going to be coming down and saving Matt from death at least for 1 turn.
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to last too long, as I can't imagine a draw that Matt Sperling can have here that would make him stay in this game.
Yeah, you would have to be like land and into the story and there's just and deal with the Lyrus somehow or with 3 mana. Finds a Soaring Thought Thief, but Eli Kassis, with 4 cards in hand.
Let's go to game 3, I think.
Yeah. Well, we'll see whether Matt agrees with you, but the only option here for him is to flash out this Soaring Thought Thief to block, and we know that Eli has the answer in hand. All right, that's going to do it. So 1 game apiece here in round number 1. All of the casters' predictions are still live. And before we bring you the exciting conclusion to this round number 1 feature match, we are going to have a few short messages, so stay tuned. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to coverage of the April Strixhaven League weekend. My name's Hayu, and I'm here with Money. We are about to go into game 3 of this Rogues mirror match between Eli Kassis and Matt Sperling. And not only is it a mirror match, it is, in fact, the exact same 75 as the 2 players did work together before submitting their deck list for this weekend. The players have tied it up at 1 game apiece, and my friends, let me tell you, in the break, Mani was ripping into me for calling it an exciting conclusion to the match coming up. But what can I tell you? All I want is to see multiple counter spells on the stack at the same time, and for nobody to know who those counter spells belong to, Mani.
Yeah, and I think something that we see Matt Sperling, as we talked about earlier, is a pivot in sideboarding. For game 3, we see him leaving in 2 copies of Ruin Crab, or I guess bringing them back in at this point. So perhaps when he's on the play, he's looking for a bit more of that aggressive mill to try to enable his cards faster, as we actually see him taking out a copy of 1 mine as well as 2 negates. Maybe a bit of a reaction to that game where he had both copies of negate sitting in his hand the entire time. Who's to say? But I think for a player of his caliber, this isn't just a reaction to 1 game's instance of events. It's more identifying where am I going in this game and what is my best avenue to try to win this game 3 on the play.
Yeah, I mean, Ruin Crab is basically a Black Lotus for Into the Story, right?
I've heard some people say that, but I'm not sure who.
All right, let's go down to the feature match. We'll see whether Matt Sperling's decision to bring that in will aid or hinder him in this game number 3. And looking at the opening hands, Matt keeping another kind of land-light hand. There is an Agadeem's Awakening hiding out. Thieves Guild Enforcer, Drown and Lock, Soaring Thought Thief into the story, and Cling to Dust, though. A great selection of cards there for Matt Sperling, while Eli takes a mulligan.
I made the addendum last game that Matt's hand looks great if he hits some lands. The same is true for this game. Matt's hand looks great if he hits some lands. He does have a few more tools to put on pressure. Until he finds those lands, he has a much stronger curve here. And Eli's first hand, not very impressive. It only had a single piece of removal and lands. And this hand is better, but now it kind of suffers from being on the draw against Matt's equally aggressive hand, but on the play, so getting on the board faster.
Yeah, you can already see Thieves Guild Enforcer and Soaring Thought Thief down. Eli's graveyard starting to fill up. I know we saw one copy of Skyclave Shade milled, and there is a second one in hand. So Eli better at finding Skyclave Shades right now, but definitely behind in terms of getting those rogues down. We'll see how both of these players navigate this trickier matchup. And that's one of the interesting things, Mani, to me about this rogues deck, is that sometimes the games play out like control mirrors, and sometimes the games play out like this, where it's going to be 1-drops and 2-drops smashing up against each other.
Yeah, and it looks like Eli's actually just considering bringing back a Skyclave Shade, so fully accepting that this is the best play available to him, but this is a card that essentially, because it can't block, you're asking to be in a racing position, and that's not really what this game is currently looking to be about.
Sperling thinking about that copy of Cling to Dust on top of his library. Thinking hard about it, Mani.
Yeah, perhaps just weighing the opportunity cost of keeping a 1-mana answer to cards in the graveyard. At worst, it cantrips, but I think I can respect his position of just trying to find better draws here.
All right, let's see what Eli finds. I mean, look at Eli's hand, Mani. It is stacked. There's 2 copies of Soaring Thought Thief, Thieves Guild Enforcer, another Skyclave Shade. If he can find the mana to really unlock the potential of this hand, I think this one is going to be tight.
Yeah, all he really needs at this point is time, and Matt in his position will very much be looking to force through this into the story. He's hoping that Eli taps out at any point during this next turn cycle to try to remove one of these creatures or play a Soaring Thought Thief, something that Eli will have to do. He doesn't really have the luxury of just leaving his mana up the whole time, and Matt will happily accept that window as the time to resolve into the story.
So here we go. This is 6 damage coming across, as well as a couple of cards of mill. Looks like Eli's just going to take it. Just ever vigilant against the threat of Into the Story.
Yeah, unfortunately, the only counterspell Eli has in his hand is Drown and Lock, and there it is. Matt could not cast that into the story
Snap
fast
that
enough.
one off. 2 lands, Thieves Guild Enforcer, Skyclave Shade. More fuel in the tank for Matt Sperling. He's in a great position now in this game number 3.
Not the best into the story.
Not the best into the story, but does find a couple more threats. And with Eli Kassis at 7 life, this could just be a race to the finish line for Sperling.
Yeah, that Skyclave Shade is a big draw. This is something that Eli had, but Matt didn't, which was a recursive threat. But now Eli has at least some creatures on the board. He has a way of getting over that card threshold, and this is still a game.
This is definitely a game. You can see Eli, and we've reached that point in these kind of control counterspell mirrors where no one wants to tap out, but as soon as someone taps out, everyone starts tapping out. And you can see Eli just taking the opportunity to dump his hand out on the board, making a formidable army of his own. And now the board states are pretty evenly matched here as we go back over to Matt Sperling.
Yeah, Ely finding that into the story. Oh, I'm starting to get scared for Matt Sperling because he does not currently have all the tools. He does have available to him an attack here, and if Ely makes what are the obvious blocks, Matt has a Cling to Dust in hand plus escaping it to reduce his graveyard size below the size that it would essentially need to go in order for Ely's creatures to get shrunk again.
Oh, so dangerous times here for Ely in this block phase. But given that he sort of debated Matt Sperling in the previous game with that fabled passage Cling to Dust sequence, he's going to be well aware of the potential for something like that to happen here. Does line up the blocks. We're going to
Yeah,
see Cling on Cling. Yeah,
Matt
Ely
can
actually choosing not to risk his Soaring Thought Thief, but will throw that Thieves Guild Enforcer in front.
right by blocking the Sorry Thought Thief on the Thought Thief, he would be exposing himself to potentially a Thought Thief from Matt to offer that trade. That's not something that he's really looking for. But here, by making that block, he's losing only his Thieves Guild Enforcer, keeping his 2 flyers around to try this to try to mill this graveyard again, and that's going to be all important for enabling this into the story while Matt is tapped out.
Well, Matt's graveyard is now very small, I believe, or medium small, should we say. I think it's 4 cards currently in the graveyard for Matt. And that number is going down as Soul Guide Lantern takes out the Cling to Dust. So Ely's just going to be content with cycling this Soul Guide Lantern this turn. Finds another land, can cast some Scythe Shades, but Skyclear Shade, it's a great aggressive creature. Has a very important line of text on it, though, Money. Cannot block.
Yeah, and I think with this attack from Eli Kassis, this may be game as the best Eli can do is play a Skyclave Shade. Matt perhaps will be a bit cautious and play around some things, but he has a Heartless Act. He can remove the singleton blocker from Eli, and at least the information we have says that Eli doesn't really have any tools available to him. Oh,
Oh,
he's been holding a
he.
Drown in the Loch in midair this whole time. I
Yeah, he's
see. Oh,
been
okay, Eli.
hiding it
Okay.
from casters, hiding it from the viewers, hiding it from everybody. So Soaring Thought Thief goes away. Sperling does take out the opposing Soaring Thought Thief and get in for 3, but 3 is not 5. We're going to see Skyclave Shade come out, but I think this means that Ely knows that this into the story is going to resolve.
It's going to resolve. He doesn't know it, but he has to fight through 3 lethal attackers next turn. So it needs to be into the story, into 2 answers. And that's a big ask. He needs 2 1-drops. And let's see what he draws.
All right, well.
That's
Oh,
0
it's
1-drops.
negate and 3 lands. Is there an Agadeem's Awakening that could have found something?
There is not.
Oh, this was actually all happening in Ely's end step. So, because he was unable to find 2 answers to these lethal threats, that is going to do it. Matt
Yeah,
Sperling gets
unfortunately.
his revenge and takes Eli Kassis down in our first feature match of the day.
Yeah, I think this is a huge sigh of relief for Matt Sperling. He went 0-2 against Ely in mirror matches yesterday, and that was the difference between Ely and Matt at the top of the Rivals League standings. With this win, Matt ties it up again, breaks the curse of yesterday. Today is a new day, and Matt wants that first place spot today.
Yeah, we will definitely be following the story of Ely versus Matt as we go out throughout this day. And Marnie, this does set up the potential for something that Tim has been hinting at a little bit throughout the broadcast, which is that if the 2 players are tied for points at the end of the Swiss rounds today, they are actually going to have to play off for that spot. So keep your eye out on their standings as we go through today, because we are very excited for the potential of a decider match between them. All right, we have got more magic to bring you from round number 1. Before we go to break, let's just have a look at what that match is going to be. And it's going to be a doozy. Andrea Mengucci up against Hall of Famer Reid Duke. And 4-color Doom Foretold up against trusty old Gruul Adventures for Reid.
Yeah, this is a matchup that we have seen a lot of in past standards, not quite so much in Kaldheim standard, but 4-color Doom Foretold, Esper Doom Foretold, this was the predator to the Gruul Adventures deck that otherwise terrorized standard. So Andrea has a bit of a good matchup in store for him.
Yeah, this does feel like a bit of a throwback to last summer, last autumn time when we were seeing these brushfire elementals and embercleaves everywhere. So, yeah, that one's coming up after the break. We will see you in a few minutes. And I guess pick your winner now. What's up, my friends? How are you all doing? My name's Haya and I'm here with Mani. We are bringing you the April Strixhaven League weekend, and we have just seen exhilarating clash in the Rogues Mirror between Eli Kassis and Matt Sperling, where Matt Sperling did come out on top of that one. We are about to jump into our second feature match of round number 7. Let's have a look at what is going on. It is Andrea Mengucci up against Reid Duke, and Andrea has brought his trademark Esperoni deck. Mani, how long has Andrea been playing these decks in League Weekend?
He's been playing it for about as long as they would let him. He's been playing it for as long as Yorin has been in Standard, Ikoria, the spring set of last year now. And we've seen different iterations of Esper Doom Foretold, and now with Kaldheim 4-color Doom Foretold introducing Binding the Old Gods to the mix. The Powerful Saga is so good that it essentially forces this deck to play a 4th color. But this is the deck that we're used to seeing from Andrea. This is the mix of just removal spells and interaction combined with these powerful sagas and enchantments, and notably Archon of Sun's Grace is one of your primary finishers.
Yeah, Archon of Sun's Grace. pretty scary threat in the air, able to make a bunch of friends that all have lifelink, great against aggro, and if left unchecked, can take over a game all by itself. Let's see what Andrea is up against in the hands of Reid Duke. It's Gruul Adventures.
Yeah, the old tried and true here. This is a deck that we have seen a ton of over the past year and a half at this point. Different iterations, different evolutions. Most recently with Kaldheim, we'd seen it sort of evolve into Naya Adventures and start splashing white for cards like Giant Killer and Showdown of the Skalds. But this build here from Reid, going back to Gruul just because of how powerful it can be against a deck like Rogues. We know Rogues has been rising in popularity. We've seen the numbers, and that's what's been brought here. So Reid just bringing the classic deck that was the Rogue Slayer in its time.
All right, well, let's head down to the action and find out whether Reid can break the prediction, as it were, because, you know, we have talked a little bit about this already. These Esper decks really rose up as almost an answer to the dominance of Gruul Adventures a few months ago. Reid, let's see what he's working with. Brushfire Elemental, Bonecrusher Giant, and Kazandu Mammoth, the threats in hand, as well as a copy of Shatterskull Smashing. As for Mengucci, oh, there's that Archon of Sun's Grace we were talking about, and Doom Foretold, the namesake card of the deck.
Yeah, Andrea's hand looks absolutely absurd. This hand from Reid is already a mulligan to 6. I would guess that Reid is not mulliganing it. Perhaps the pause from him was just trying to decide what the card he's putting back is.
All right, Temple of Abandon on turn number 1. Ox of Agonis. Do you like Ox of Agonis against like this kind of Doom Foretold strategy?
I think it's one of the better cards that Gruul has available to it, which is why Reid is actually taking pause. Normally, when you're looking at a hand that is 3 to 4 lands and one of them comes at the cost of giving up one of your threats, it would be a no-brainer to put the 5-drop on the bottom of your library. But considering that this is a deck that is trying to fight over resources, it's trying to starve you out on your creatures and just remove everything you play, a card like Ox of Agonis, which is recursive and refills your hand, is extremely powerful. So Reid actually gives it fair consideration before inevitably bottoming it, because he does need a bit more action at the moment, a few more lands.
Now, these two players are in the MPL, and I believe they're currently sort of sitting in Pod A. They are in the first pod of the MPL, but they're both on 31 points, which means that they are towards the lower half or the bottom of Pod A, trying to maintain their position as we look forward to the next league weekend, and moving up the ranks and putting themselves in a good position later on.
Right. Even if they don't quite have their eyes set on, for example, Andre Strauski's spot this weekend, if Andre runs away with it in terms of points and manages to keep some of the other players in check going into the next league weekend, by maintaining their spots in the first spot, these players would be giving themselves the best shot of having a good weekend, trying to take some points from the other players in that first spot, and maybe locking up their spot to Worlds in the second Strixhaven league weekend.
All right, so both the early turns of this game developing pretty much as you would expect, Eliminate taking out that Brushfire Elemental, and Andrea Mengucci does have an Omen of the Sun to deploy this turn, but has not yet found his 4th land, and will be crossing his fingers and hoping for some mana to come off the top.
Yeah, the 4th land is going to be all important. There's a question here being posed from Andrea to Reid of, do you want to use your 2 removal spells on my tokens in order to force through 7 damage here? And I think given Reid's position, that is something he should be in the market for.
Yeah, Fire Prophecy is a nice little removal spell as well when you have something like a forest in hand that maybe, you want to see if you can change that for a threat or something that impacts the board a little bit more. We're going to see it. Fire Prophecy puts that forest on the bottom and just finds another copy of Bonecrusher Giant. So stomps are plenty here for Reid Duke. Takes out the 2nd token. Mengucci down to 11 already.
Does he find the land? This is all important. This 4th land would really put this game in Andrea's favor.
There it is.
Ooh.
All right, so things working out well now for Andrea Mengucci. Has a choice between Pelucranos and this Doom Foretold this turn. Or maybe even the Archon.
He can't afford to play the Archon. He'd be looking at so much damage coming through. I think Andrea makes the safe play of going for the Doom Foretold. You don't want to find yourself in a position where you're blocking and being punished by another stomp potentially with your Pelucranos. So this is just so safe. As it essentially forces Reid's hand and gameplay for at least 2 turns, and that's the amount of time Andrea needs to really stabilize this board.
All right. So if you're Gruul, and this is an age-old question, Marnie, I feel like I've asked you this in many of our previous lives together. But if there's a Doom Foretold on the other side of the battlefield, should you just skip a turn and just let it play itself out?
The problem is you don't really have another choice in this position. Playing a Bone Crusher Giant when Andrea very clearly is wanting to sack that Omen of the Sun anyways doesn't really benefit you. And Reid actually just giving Andrea perfect information here.
Yeah. Well, there is maximum click efficiency though for Reid, so you know.
Oh my goodness.
Is that a treacherous blessing?
Oh, it sure is.
Oh, jeez. Treacherous Blessing is so sweet in these Doom Foretold decks when you already have the Doom Foretold down. And that is going away, but Andrea will be able to refill his hand and make some tutus as well. Mengucci fully in charge of this game right now.
Yeah, if Andrea plays this Treacherous Blessing, makes a token, and finds an untapped land, he would have been able to have negate up, but finds an
What
Extinction
about
Event, doesn't even
this?
care.
Extinction Event, take out your entire board.
Okay.
What can you find? It's a Fabled Passage. That is not going to be enough, and this one has well and truly slipped away from the American superstar.
Yeah, Reid had a pretty decent mulligan, and this is the type of position he finds himself in where he may be wishing he had kept that Oxyvagonus on top. Perhaps this game would look very different if he had access to the single one main deck copy of the escape creature that he has available to him. But as it stands, he's now finding himself more than flooded on lands, and Questing Beast looks to be too little too late.
Questing Beast usually exactly what you want to find after an extinction event for that, second win. But Andrea Mengucci already at 17 life thanks to the lifelink on those Pegasus creatures provided by the Archon of Sun's Grace. And it's not very often that you see Questing Beast come down and the control player just almost doesn't care at all.
Yeah, and I believe this is just lethal with Andrea making another Pegasus on Reid's end step, untapping, and assuming he has the mana available to him, just playing Pelucranos to fight down this questing beast and clear the way for a lethal attack here.
I don't believe there's quite enough to do. Maybe there is. There's
He
4
did
plus.
have just
So
enough.
he does have it just enough, but decides in the end just to go in the air. It's all moot point anyway. Reid doesn't really have a single draw that can get him out of this. It would be a multiple series of draws. Let's see what he can find. So you've got to hand it to Reid Duke. Never gives up.
May as well take the draw, but, the Great Hand is not going to quite get it done here.
Yeah, not this time for Reid Duke, and he is going to scoop it up. Mengucci takes game 1 in pretty quick order here in our feature match.
Yeah, this is, again, just a very tough matchup for Gruul. It certainly has the possibilities of going your way. You do have the cards to try to win. Brushfire Elemental and Questing Beast both notably have that all-important clause of not being able to be blocked by creatures with 2 or less power. That does a great job of forcing damage through Pegasus, forcing damage through the tokens from Omen of the Sun. We saw how advantageous that Omen of the Sun for Andrea was, as it forced Reid to spend an entire turn using 2 removal spells to just get rid of tokens from Andrea. So the tools are there for Reid to try to win the game, but again, Andrea's deck is very much designed with all of his cards lining up well for this matchup.
And now it's interesting to see Reid Duke actually side out some of the more explosive cards like Embercleave in this matchup. Is that just because it's hard to keep a creature around?
Exactly. When Andrea's entire deck is built on trying to keep the board clear, a card like Embercleave loses a lot of its value. We've seen some of the more aggressive strategies improve their matchup against four-color Doom Foretold by moving to those snow builds where they get access to cards like Faceless Haven, because a lot of the removal from this four-color Doom Foretold deck does come at sorcery speed, again, trying to keep the board clear. So Faceless Haven extremely powerful. Gruul doesn't have access to stuff like that. So instead, they're going for sticky creatures, Phoenix of Ash, Ox of Agonis. These are the cards that can help you fight through this removal barrage from Andrea.
And that singleton copy of Perforos's Intervention, there seems to be a mini trend alert going on with this card. We've seen it pop up in a couple of different places here, and I'm usually not one to root for an aggro deck against a control deck. I love me a counterspell, but Perforos's Intervention, if we see Reid Duke in a situation like he was this game, where maybe his threats have been answered, he's just playing land after land, that can be an interesting one to come off the top to potentially close out a game.
It's certainly part of the consideration. Again, a lot of sorcery speed removal for Andrea Mengucci, Elspeth's Nightmare, Doom Foretold. Less instant speed. There's 4 copies of Eliminate for post board as well as 4 Heartless Act, but that's about it. And those are already going to have a lot of targets. So you may find yourself in a position where Hasty Attacker off the top does get the job done. The other notable point for it is it answers Archon of Sun's Grace. We saw how powerful the Archon was that game, and having more answers is something Reid Duke is in the market for.
And there it is, Perforos's Intervention in the opener here for Reid Duke, along with Rimrock Knight, Ox of Agonis, and Kazandu Mammoth. So this hand a little bit set up for a longer game for Reid Duke. Mengucci, I believe, on a mulligan, finds Archon, Doom Foretold, Heartless Act, and Extinction Event, but notably no black or white mana just yet.
Yeah, Andrea, I didn't get a good glimpse at his 7, but at first glance, it didn't seem that bad. And
Oh,
instead,
never
the smoke
mind.
at the 6.
Never mind. Omen of the Sea fixes everything.
I'm still scared. I do not have the same confidence that you have in this Omen fixing the straw
Just
from Andrea.
put your faith in the Omen of the Sea. Sea Ordain, as we've been calling it.
Of course, the Sea Ordain.
It just does everything. I never feel like anything can possibly go wrong when I have an Omen of the Sea, and of course, that's just me shilling for big blue cards. There it is in Death of Triumph. Mana problems semi over question mark for Andrea Mengucci.
That helps a lot. He really needed to find a way to cast this Heartless Act. Reid wasn't putting on that much pressure, but the Lovestruck Beast he drew off the top really fixed that. And now for Andrea, having access to this Lovestruck Beast is going to be huge in how the remainder of this game plays out.
Andrea finds an Eliminate as well. That's going to take care of this Lovestruck Beast. And now we're seeing the removal flowing from this Doom Foretold deck as we are used to seeing.
Yeah, we've highlighted it time and time again throughout this weekend. People play removal spells as sorcery speed against decks like Gruul, against decks like Dimir Adventures, and that's all a nod to the Great Henge. If you let your opponent untap with one of those large creatures and be able to play a reduced cost Great Henge, that can just be game ending. So Andrea doesn't want to walk into that position when he's still trying to develop his board, and it just fires off the eliminated sorcery speed.
Let's see whether Mengucci finds his 4th land. Of course, it just comes perfectly off the top.
Never didn't have it, of course.
There's a lot to be said for just trusting, for just believing that your deck is going to treat you well.
Yep, now Andrea gets to play Doom Foretold. This targets that Brushfire Elemental as it does say non-token. He then sets a stop on his own upkeep to flash in Omen of the Sea, keep his Doom Foretold around, and will still have the mana to Heartless Act, another threat from Reid Duke. So once again, Andrea hitting his land drops results in just the game completely turning around from a bit of a scary position.
Yeah, Reid can develop out an Edgewall Innkeeper into Rimrock Knight. So on the face of it, this does save one of these creatures from that Doom Foretold, but as you say, Marnie, that Heartless Act is waiting. And Mengucci just somewhat perfectly is able to both keep the Doom Foretold around and still have mana to play out that removal spell.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where Reid is hoping that he'll at least try to fight through some of the card advantage from Andrea, at least maybe hoping that this Doom Foretold is going away, but Andrea really has everything he needs here.
All right, Omen of the Sea. Digging, we assume, for some mana at this point of the game. Looks like
Yeah,
there's a bit of a
mana
choice.
would be nice.
One top, one bottom. Draw the card. Oh, it's actually a golden egg. So another redraw for Andrea. He's actually just going to, instead of using that Heartless Act to clear off the board for Reid, prioritize keeping this Doom Foretold around. And of course, the fifth land comes off the last second that it possibly can from that golden egg draw.
Yeah, but we're starting to approach the territory where this Perforos' intervention could be a real card.
Okay, all right. So 5 lands available to read right now. So that means that Perforos' intervention is currently making a 4-1 with Trample and Haste.
All right, how you draw 25 or win the game? What you picking?
Draw 25.
All right,
Sorry,
well,
what?
Rimrock Knight
How
is
is that
going in the
even a
graveyard then.
how is that even a question?
Well, it is a question for Reid Duke. You see him agonizing over this question. Do I keep the card advantage of Edgewall Innkeeper, or do I go for the
Reid.
pressure?
Man after my own heart. I'm so happy. Draw 25 every time.
Yeah, it seems like he did. He did not find that question that close.
All right. Well, Edgewall Innkeeper is still around, and I guess here's the consequence of keeping it around, having to play out this Bone Crusher Giant. Finds a land off the top.
Good land.
Which, yeah, it's a nice one actually. An untapped green source, meaning that Reid will be able to play out the Kazandu Mammoth as well. And that's going to be presenting a huge board for Andrea Mengucci to deal with. Of course, we know that he has the extinction event, the key extinction event available.
Yeah, that's going to be presenting a huge board for Andrea to enjoy extinction eventing.
It's so sweet, that feeling where and Andrea, I have to give it to him. He clicked odd very quickly. I usually make myself, just pause before clicking odd or even, because if you misclick there, it is a big deal. Reid is actually going to discard the Perforos' intervention to the Doom Foretold trigger. Is there a reason to do that? I guess he's just going
He
to play
wants
the
to draw a
Octopus.
full new hand.
Yeah.
And something that we do see from Andrea is just playing quite fast. Part of that is because he has the reps in with his deck. He's been playing this deck nonstop for so long now that a lot of the questions, I think, just feel like they come naturally to him at this point.
And we have to also give a shout out. It's not just Andrea working on this deck. That I believe there's a whole team, or at least a couple of Italian Magic players working pretty hard on these specific builds week after week.
It's a very specific two-person team of Andrea Mengucci and Upumpa89 Tianfamun, an Italian teammate of his. So really, a lot of the credit goes out to the two of them working together on Esper Doom Foretold for well over a year now.
All right. So Mengucci has a grip full of cards, finds a land drop as well, but is only really able to play out one more thing this turn, and it is going to be Doom Foretold. But sacrificing Ox of Agonis, you're not too upset to do so, because that's going to be able to help you later on.
You're not too upset, but you're not quite there yet. Andrea does have an Elspeth's Nightmare and a Cling to Dust that we see on the top of his deck. Reid Duke doesn't see. Reid doesn't have the cards to escape the Ox quite yet, so I think this is going to work out really well for Andrea here.
First things first, Stomp to take care of the 2/2 Knight. 1/1 is going to come in, and Reid thinking about whether he's going to, and I believe that the answer is yes, he's going to play out 2 of these 3 drops, knowing that one of them is going to die in his upkeep.
Yeah, one strategy against the Doom Foretold is try to overload it. And when Reid has an Ox of Agonis in his graveyard, he feels like he may actually have the luxury of doing that. Unfortunately, what Andrea has is everything. this turn he can Cling to Dust the Ox of Agonis, go up to a healthy life total, Elspeth's Nightmare down that token if he wants, and still leave up Omen of the Sea plus Heartless Act in case Reid Duke gets in a position where he tries to put on too much pressure. If not, he just flashes in the Omen of the Sea, keeps the Doom Foretold around for another turn, and lets that clear up the board.
I mean, we talked a lot about the Perforos's intervention, but I suppose that's not getting through the Heartless Act in Mengucci's hand anyway. So you see Reid Andrea really both contemplating their options. Andrea very animated as we are used to seeing from him. Reid a little bit more stoic.
Yeah, these matches are just so high stakes that I don't think it's any surprise we're seeing players take their time and fully consider all their options each and every turn just to make sure that they aren't misstepping in a crucial position that can affect their results for another year.
Extinction event found off Omen of the Sea. Doom Foretold going off, getting rid of the last card. Reid just finds a Fabled Passage off the top. That is going to let him play. No, it isn't going to let him play the Ox. Oh my goodness, because Extinction Event took out those creatures instead of sacrificing to Doom Foretold, even though the Fabled Passage would be the 8th card in the graveyard, you actually need 9 cards because Ox of Agonis requires 8 other cards. So a hair's breadth between Reid Duke and being able to, carry on the flow of card advantage. But unfortunately, he's going to see the bad news very shortly. Mengucci does have the Cling to Dust in hand, has the Archon to start pushing into the late game as well now.
And you have to assume Andrea Mengucci did that calculation when choosing not to Cling to Dust the Ox last turn. If Andrea thought there was any way Reid could escape it on the upcoming turn, he would have played around that. But knowing that there isn't a single draw in Reid's deck that would enable that 8th and 9th card in his graveyard, he just plays in a way where he doesn't have to take the Ox. And the same is true now. Andrea is still putting himself in a position where Reid can't suddenly escape the Ox without Andrea getting a chance to Cling to Dust it.
So, Vivian Monster's Advocate, what can this Planeswalker do to help Reid?
It can try to string together a series of draws off the top of the deck. In terms of creatures, he needs a cheap one pretty much immediately. The token, the reach blocker, as he can put a reach counter on it, can do a good job of trying to buy time by blocking the Archon. But what I would guess would happen is if Reid doesn't find a creature here, we'll see an eliminate on the token on the end step. Andrea will untap Elspeth's Nightmare down the 1/1 Princess token from Heart's Desire, and then we'll see the Vivian go down and essentially leave Reid with absolutely nothing.
Speaking to you is like visiting a fortune teller sometimes, Manny. But like a very precise one. Like much more precise than your average, horoscope. We'll see whether that does indeed come to pass. Going to start off with the crack on the Fabled Passage, and that's going to prompt the Cling to Dust on the Ox.
Yeah, Reid cracking the Fabled Passage to try to get a redraw in terms of Vivian's top of the library ability. Still, the Craig Crown Pathway was not able to find another card on top. So at this point, Andrea now has perfect information when Reid doesn't play a creature, and he knows that he has permission to essentially do whatever he wants. And here we go, eliminate Elspeth's Nightmare, still has Cling to Dust, and this is the beginning of the end for Reid Duke.
Oh my goodness, binding the old gods as well, Andrea Mengucci. Things going from bad to worse for Reid Duke. Everybody at Vivian. So at least Reid's life total is still, in place for another turn, but we already knew that it was going to be Crag Crown Pathway off the top. Not quite lethal yet, but almost in a couple of turns for Andrea Mengucci, and Reid can only watch as he goes down to 4.
And Urian's about to make 2 more Pegasus tokens, as well as drawing Andrea another card with that Omen, giving him 2 more scries. Reid doesn't have a single draw in his deck that can even begin to get him out of the hole that this Esper Doom Foretold 4-color Doom Foretold deck has put him in. And this is why this matchup is just so absolutely atrocious for Gruul Adventures.
Yeah, and there you see it, Reid. Ever the gentleman extending the good games here. Andrea Mengucci taking